What do you think about that music, folks? Who played it enough? Again, that's courtesy of Doug Diamond from Diamond Digital Media. Doug's in the house tonight. Let me know if you can see and hear me okay. Kathleen will be signing on here momentarily. She is home this evening. I have my flannels on because it's New Hampshire and it's the dead of winter. It was 17 degrees this morning at 8 o'clock when I went out. Quite chilly, but it's been dry. We had some snow yesterday, not a big deal, about an inch of it. All right. Thank you, Pamela. You love the music. Excellent. Yeah, Doug does a good job. So, Doug, if you're listening, let's get a new selection. I think we had about 5 in that group. If you're listening, how about putting together another group of 5 or 6 songs of the same sort of flavor that you sent this time and the previous time? And I think we all enjoy your musical taste. So thank you, my friend. All right. Early question. It seems like it's out of our control, isn't it? It. Seems like it's out of control, isn't it? I would agree. Except it's all under God's control. Thanks, Doug. All righty. So, a couple of announcements I just want to get off the chest real quick. It was in the list of things that we're going to be covering this evening, but this is breaking news. I mean, confirmational. I want to apologize, first of all, because yesterday the title for the live stream was regarding the blockchain digital identities, and I never even addressed it last night. Just went right over the top of the main topic and never even addressed it. So we're going to hit that first this evening. I put it as number 1 on the list, and I would like to talk about that, but I also have, as the second point of news that I want to bring up, and that's what I sent to you regarding Greece, and this came by way of one of our patrons this afternoon. So I'm so indebted to our patrons who are on top of so many things and send them to me, and I try to work as much as I can of what you send to me into these live streams. But this is concerning Greece and their prime minister, who I'm just going to call Karaoke because I can't pronounce his name, is forcing Greeks to spend 30% of their income electronically. Okay, so we'll give you the big picture from 40,000 feet on patch air on what this story portends for the rest of the world. But before we get into the rest of the world, let's go right to our scripture. Again, I've been posting scriptures that are very familiar, and I've done that with the intent, the purpose, that we go down through sort of as I said yesterday, the chocolate layer cake, that we go down through the layers in Scripture and we apply technology to interpret in the modern era, interpret 2,000, sometimes older, scriptures. And I've spoken an awful lot about Revelation 9:1, and the 5th angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. We've discussed this for years. The reason I'm bringing it up today is there's going to be a little different interpretation. We're going a little deeper. Some of it is familiar, what I'm bringing to you, but in the finer point that I will deliver to you in a few minutes on this interpretation takes us to a deeper level in the chocolate layer cake. And as my wife will attest, I love sweets, I love chocolate, and I love chocolate layer cakes. I would be 300 pounds if I didn't have some restraint, some willpower. But anyway, let's not get off on that track too far. But we're going to look at the key to the bottomless pit again. So let's go right to it. We have a lot to cover tonight. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday after I cover the news. Okay, so let's go to the blockchain and digital identities. Before I get into reading this, I'm going to give you the big takeaway. We have focused on Libra, the cryptocurrency, the blockchain of Libra, what that portends, that it's going to be the single global currency in the beast system. And we know that. And we've said that to access that system, one will have to make the decision to take the mark of the beast. Well, that means that you have a new identity. The big takeaway is the identity, the digital identity. Remember way back, over 3 years ago, I introduced what was known as the sentient world simulation, something that was put together at Purdue University. That was in 2006. White paper published 2007 and went live. All of the intelligence communities around the world are tied into and participate in the SWS. In that sentient world simulation, which is driven by classical, but primarily because of the encryption driven by quantum computing, this simulation, which is self-aware, okay, tracks every person on the planet already, represents every person on the planet as a computer node, and we are going to be talking later on today about AI, the history of AI, and computer nodes, and neural nodes, and neural networks. So I haven't forgotten about the history of AI. It's on our list. But everyone is represented in the software as a computer node and given an avatar. That avatar is your identity. That's your digital identity in the simulation, in the sentient world simulation. So with that background, and you guys have heard and read it in Tangled magazine about this extensively, let's dive into this article from MIT Technology Review dated June 25th of this year. It's a short article, but this came out the same time that Libra was officially announced through Facebook. So the title is How Facebook's New Blockchain Might Revolutionize Our Digital Identities, bearing in mind the SWS, okay? The Libra cryptocurrency was unveiled on a wave of hype and speculation, but what its white paper suggested about Facebook's vision for how we manage our identifying credentials may be just as important. Now, I would agree with that. It's one thing to have a cryptocurrency. It's another to have the blockchain system of distributed ledgers. And as we covered yesterday, we talked about permissionless access. That means everybody can get in. Or permission only, private key encryption versus public key. Okay, so we covered that extensively yesterday. But now to add to the key, which we're going to talk about again, as I said, the key to the bottomless pit. This is another example of the key is, as I've said many, many times, the key to the bottomless pit is that private key that decrypts the information on opening the bottomless pit. And even talking about defining the pit itself. We go into mathematics, we talk about Google's claimed quantum supremacy and that their algorithm is essentially endless, infinite. It's a pit. It's a mathematical pit, and we said that a couple of months ago. But here now what we're adding to this is the layer of identity being digitally identified in this system. That's the mark of the beast, folks. The digital identity. Now, I've said that DNA, third strand of DNA, dormant nanoparticle DNA, activated through 5G and 6G, resulting in a physical mark. That mark is tied to your digital identity. It is linked. That physical mark is linked. This is why we've been talking about nanodiamonds and Dust Identity, the company with Algorand, and that system of encryption through Algorand being tied together, this nanodiamond sensor system is the mark of the beast. The physical mark of the beast will manifest. And I believe at this point it will be composed of nanodiamonds, that physical mark. But the nanodiamonds serve as the link, as I demonstrated to you last week when we talked about dust identity, and it's in the December issue of Entangled magazine. The nanodiamonds provide the physical connection to the digital realm. They are sensors. They are nano-digital sensors. They can receive data, they can process to a limited degree, and then transmit the results of that computational process. They are a relay. They are a receiver and transmitter. This is how the mark of the beast digitally connects your physical body. If you take the mark of the beast, physically connects to the digital sentient world simulation by way of nanodiamond sensors. Those nanodiamonds are already within our bodies. They're on our bodies. They're in the environment. They're in the air we breathe. They are in the foods we consume. They provide that sensor function, computational function, and that relaying of information from its sensory and computational functions, relaying digital information through the cloud from what is known as edge computing. This is where the nanodiamonds are on the edge of the internet. This is edge computing, connecting through the cloud into the blockchain system. Those are the basic components right there. So let's get into this article, because we're talking digital identities. Last week, after months of hype and speculation, Facebook finally revealed its plan to launch a blockchain system called Libra. Since the launch, most of the attention has focused on Libra Coin, the cryptocurrency that will run on the new blockchain. But tucked away in one of the documents Facebook published is something that may turn out to be just as important as the coin, if not more so. And again, I'm in agreement here. A major goal of the Libra Association, remember, Concordia, Logothetis. We're going to talk about Greece next. The Libra Association, coming out of Concordia. Major goal of the Libra Association, the nonprofit Facebook has created to manage the project's development. That's erroneous. Facebook, no. Concordia, yes. They won't reveal it here, but I've revealed it to you. So as Kathleen, we together have revealed Concordia is the founding organization, not Facebook. Facebook's one of 28 current, and there will be 100 founding members. Okay, so this is a red herring, this statement here. Let's continue. Is to use Libra to revolutionize the concept of digital identity. Well, yes, indeed. Let's repeat that. The major goal of the Libra Association is to use Libra to revolutionize the concept of digital identity. That's Mark of the Beast, folks. You can 180 that yourself. You can see the truth pulled out of and extracted out of that sentence. The relevant passage lives near the bottom of a document meant to explain the role of the Libra Association. Quote, an additional goal of the association is to develop and promote an open identity standard. We believe that decentralized and portable digital identity is a prerequisite to financial inclusion and competition. Now remember, we have to look at the red flags. They choose their words very carefully and specifically. Decentralized, okay? I already said blockchain is not decentralized. When you look at the encryption and the private key by way of quantum computing that we elaborated on again last night. Then you look at portable digital identity. Guess what? Mark of the beast on your body, that's pretty portable, isn't it? And a prerequisite Okay, got to take the mark or you can't access the system. Prerequisite to financial inclusion and competition. Remember, we have talked about the underbanked, the underserved, the bankless, those words that have been bantied around regarding Libra is to include, inclusion, right? The inclusion of well over 1 billion people that no longer have never used banks. A shadow economy. I'm going to talk about that when we talk about Greece in just a moment. This sort of shadow market. People who only use cash or people who use a barter system. They don't use banks. They want to include them because they're underbanked and they're underserved. They make it sound so politically correct and sensitive. No, what they want is to be able to have every single person tracked through the mark of the beast system. That's what digital identity is. Yeah, Libra is, hey, we want to have people participating in the Libra cryptocurrency system of the world. Well, what does that mean then? It means you have to be digitally identified in order for you to be able to access this digital banking. Again, we're going to talk about Greece in just a moment. These two articles I'm sharing with you absolutely, as jigsaw puzzle pieces, fit perfectly together. We've been building this picture, folks. I've been getting many emails in the last couple of days, especially since last night's live stream. People are telling me, I'm finally getting the picture. No, I'm not being condescending saying that. It is a very complex picture. It's very hard to wrap your head around. These things have to be digested. They have to be repeated. They have to be broken down into chunks, fed again, then reconfigured and put into different packages and then repeated and given again. And then it begins to make sense. Then it begins to look like clarity. Folks, we are seeing the beast system coming together, the jigsaw puzzle pieces coming together so fast now. I was talking again about the dominoes. I was talking about the birth pangs. You cannot deny the fact, and I know you guys aren't. I'm just saying sort of, broad stroke here. You cannot deny that this is all the components of the beast system coming together in rapid fashion. Next year, 2020, I talked about that last night. I won't go into it again. Here we go. But what is decentralized and portable identity? The question in the article here. In theory, it provides a way to avoid having to trust a single, centralized authority to verify and take care of our identifying credentials. For internet users, it would mean that instead of relying on Facebook or Google's own login tool to provide our credentials to other websites, we could own and control them ourselves. In theory, this could better protect that information from hackers and identity thieves, since it wouldn't live on company servers. The concept, sometimes called self-sovereign identity. Look, folks, I've been talking about sovereignty, national sovereignty. Now they're talking about personal sovereignty. Flip all of this stuff 180, and you see what is really on the horizon here. The concept, sometimes called self-sovereign identity. Flip that around. There's nothing about being self-sovereign here. When we get into talking about AI later on, we're going to talk about the hive mind and collective AI. Collective AI. And contextual, self-aware of the environment, contextual AI. Because I'm taking you from the history to the near future as we talk about the history of AI later on. So, the concept, sometimes called self-sovereign identity, is something of a holy grail. Why would they use those words? Okay? Again, they choose their words specifically. Okay? Is something of a holy grail in the world of internet technology. and developers have been pursuing it for years. Big companies, including Microsoft and IBM, have been working on decentralized identity applications for a while now, and so have a number of startups. But it's more than just an internet thing. For the roughly 1 billion people around the world without any kind of identifying credentials at all, such technology could make it possible to access financial services that they cannot today, starting with things like bank accounts and loans. Okay, it's all inclusive. They're trying to bring them in. Well, what happens if you have a market of a few billion people, okay? And there are over 7 billion on the planet. But let's say you have 6 billion people in the banking system, as it is today. But you still have another billion people. What if you were a banker? What if you were a business owner and you had the promise, you had the ability to access another 1 billion customers? That would be something for a businessman or a banker to get pretty excited about, wouldn't they? So they're looking at it from greed. They're looking at it from greed to bring them in. And they talk about inclusion and serving the underbanked as if that's a problem. But it's being driven by greed. But way beyond the greed is the Antichrist. Way beyond the greed that builds the blockchain already today of the cryptocurrencies and the blockchain of the Libra cryptocurrency. That's the greed. That's the brainstem level thinking. Beyond that is the Antichrist, and we know that. These people don't. They're blinded to that. Helping some of these people must be part of what Facebook meant when it said in the Libra white paper that the new system is intended to, quote, serve as an efficient medium of exchange for billions of people around the world and to improve access to financial services. In some cases, the currency itself might be able to do that, but in others, it's likely that users will need some form of identification to access a particular service. That's probably why Libra's developers call an open portable identity standard a, quote, prerequisite to financial inclusion. Folks, that right there says mark of the beast. Prerequisite to financial inclusion. Now, you can have plenty of bankers and business people who could come at me and point the finger at me and laugh at me and scoff at me and say, what are you talking about? This is just a mechanism for bringing more people into a banking system. Why do you have to make this theological? Probably the question should be, why do you have to make it spiritual? Well, my answer is because this is all Luciferian. This is all enslavement. So let's step off, parenthetically, step off this track for just a little bit of a detour. Now, I was speaking with Kathleen just before coming on the air this evening, and we were talking about Satan, and we were talking about how he copies everything, the counterfeiting we've spoken of so much. And I said it's driven by greed. Satan's greed. He is like a child. Think of a young child, a little child, who's greedy about possessions, their toys, or even the toys of their siblings. And they scream and they yell and they grab and they fight and they say, no, it's mine. No, it's mine. No, it's mine. And then they scream for mom or dad or both. That's Satan. I'm not saying the children are possessed or something. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mentality of Satan, in which he functions on a greed basis, which goes lockstep with lying and cheating and all the other stuff. But he is like a child claiming that which God has created, claiming it as his own. That's the counterfeiting. So when he's building all of these different systems through technologies, it's because he wants to change what God created. Because Satan can't create anything. He can change things. He can modify things. And then to the world who disavows God and Jesus Christ, who turn their faces from God and Jesus Christ, to that world, which is the majority of the population, he can deceive them into saying through these, quote, discoveries of technology that these are new. They're a new creation. That they're apart from God without even mentioning God or Jesus. He claims it as his own. And he does that through the people that he has deceived, that are going through the research and the development and putting all these things together. We talked about Creative Destruction Lab yesterday, the business incubator, the whole process of destroying what exists and creating something new. That all comes from the greed of Satan. That all comes from him like a little child saying, no, it's mine, it's mine. So picture Satan in his diaper with his rattle and his binky in his mouth, crying and screaming for what he claims is his when in fact it's all God's. Satan, you can take a hike. All right. But such a digital identity could go beyond finance too. Sharing many kinds of sensitive data using a blockchain, for instance, health information, might require some form of automated ID check. Remember I was talking yesterday about Alibaba again? And if you go to their website, this is what they're building out. You go one-stop shopping, you go to their website for all of the needs in your life. You see, they're taking what they've learned and developed through AI-driven blockchain in e-commerce, proven that that infrastructure works, and now they can apply that AI-driven and quantum computer-driven infrastructure of e-commerce to every aspect of a person's life, including the healthcare information, as this Facebook article is indicating right here. It's the same thing I said about Alibaba. So everything, your healthcare records, everything will be in the blockchain, and it will require some form of automated ID check. Mark of the beast. All right, we're almost done with this article. Facebook itself already has experience with digital identities. Facebook Connect lets users log into third-party sites using their Facebook verified credentials. You might be using it to access technologyreview.com right now, it says here. That was the source of this article. But Facebook Connect is risky because it relies on a central authority, argues Christopher Allen, co-chair of the Credentials Community Group of the World Wide Web Consortium, the most important international standards body for the web. Trusting one identity with this responsibility is dangerous because the site could go down or the business could fail, and Facebook can revoke accounts at will. Well, there is going to be one entity, and people are going to trust that one entity. That's the Antichrist. And that digital identity, again, I'm just going to keep repeating it, it's the mark of the beast. Continuing, but it's hard to say how decentralized Libra's new identity system would be, because Facebook hasn't revealed anything about what it's planning. Well, folks, Kathleen and I have revealed quite a bit about what Libra is planning, and we showed you all the players, we showed you the founders, we showed you the organization, we showed you the worldwide leaders in business, banking, and politics, okay? And we've shown you what they're planning. You know how we did that? All you have to do is read the Bible. It's really simple. For example, the article says there's the possibility that the digital identity will only work inside the Libra network, which requires permission to participate in. This is why I was talking yesterday about permission access, which requires a private key, and permissionless access to the blockchain. I'm building those foundational blocks for you of understanding the system so that when you read articles like this, you're able to dissect it, take it apart, and understand what they're saying. But they're right here. Let's read it again. For example, there's the possibility that the digital identity will only work inside the Libra network. Well, they're right. How can I say that? Because it will be the only global currency. And your identity will only work in the Libra network. Because there's no other network, and you have to have the mark of the beast to access it. That's the 180 of that statement, folks. Again, which requires permission to participate in. Well, permission is the mark. Unlike systems like Bitcoin and Ethereum, for which anyone with the right hardware and an internet connection can join in and help validate transactions. Okay, that's permissionless. Okay. Libra requires its validators to be identified and approved. That's permission. Nearly 30 companies have already signed up to run network nodes, see, sentient world simulation, and those are AI nodes, okay, to run network nodes, and Libra's developers want to up that to 100. Talking about 100 companies by the time the platform is supposed to launch for real next year. Now, when they say nearly 30 companies have already signed up to run the network nodes, and it'll go up to 100, they're talking about the founders of Libra, of which Facebook's only one. So they said nearly 30, what I published last month in Entangled magazine in November about Libra was that there were 28 as of November. And I said back then that it would be as many as 100 founders. So now when you read that sentence, you know what they're really talking about. That's why we published the magazine. Okay? Facebook's main message with the launch of Libra and the Libra Association appears to be a response to past criticisms of how it handled personal data. Now remember, I said 2 years ago with the Cambridge Analytica fiasco that Facebook would, within 30 to 60 days, migrate all private information over to a blockchain system. 30 days after I made that statement, blockchain, or I should say Zuckerberg announced they were moving everybody, they were migrating over to a blockchain system to secure personal data. That was 2 years ago, folks. That gives you an indication how far back this development of Libra goes. Okay? Because the blockchain they migrated into was not identified. Now we know it was the Libra blockchain 2 years ago. I'll read it again. Facebook's main message with the launch of Libra and the Libra Association appears to be a response to past criticisms of how it handled personal data. The company appears to be saying, hey, look, we're trying to be more open. We don't want to be this honeypot of everyone's information, says Wayne Vaughn, co-founder of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, a consortium of companies all working on aspects of blockchain-based identity. But if whatever identity standards they may come up with only works for 100 companies, says Vaughn, that's not decentralized. It's just a standard for 100 companies. Facebook did not respond to a request for comment. Well, I'll give you the comment. Remember, I was saying, I'm going to go back so I can see myself yapping here on camera. There is 3 principal steps with Libra that will unfold over 2020. They have to have the infrastructure of the blockchain in place. They have that. Then they have to bring in the bankers, the business people, and the political leaders. So it's not just 100 companies. It's not just 200 companies. They're bringing in all of the companies in the world into Libra. So it is not an identity that only works with a few hundred companies. You now know what the real picture is, because it's that middle layer of businesses, banking systems, and the political leaders all buying in and setting up their systems, their infrastructure for Libra, because this is an exchange. This is a transactional cryptocurrency, whereas all existing cryptocurrencies to the present day are not set up for transactions. Libra distinguishes itself by being set up for transactions. Okay? So you have to have the buy-in at that middle stratification. And that requires permission to participate at that mid-level. Then the third level, later on next year, will be the permissionless, where everyone will be able to participate. But the key is the digital identity. I apologize, my camera for some reason is not staying in focus. Anyway, you don't need to see me. You just need to be able to hear me. The point here is that when it moves from the mid-level, where it requires permission, it will go to a so-called permissionless system. The distinction here is that at the mid-level, where you have to gain permission, those organizations will be given a private key, because this is a system of encryption to access the blockchain. But at the permissionless level, it's a public key. Moving from private key to public key, meaning everyone, just like in the existing cryptocurrencies today, if you have a computer or an internet access, you can participate. But at this permissionless public key, everyone can play level, that's where the blockchain requires a digital identity. You have to have your identity verified in order to be given the public key to publicly access Libra later on this year. It will require more than just having a computer and internet access as exists today with existing cryptocurrencies. Libra will require that your identity is verified, and then you'll have public access. But you see, we're dissecting what it means to have a digital identity here. It really means, with the 180 applied, that you have to take the mark of the beast. Then your identity is verified. And the digital identity is that connection of nanodiamond digital connection to the digital world of your physical body. You see how the pieces are fitting together? We've been building this all year for you, okay? All right. These are just confirmational articles of everything we've already been talking about. You guys are way ahead of the rest of the world. Either way, it's not clear how Facebook and Libra Association would overcome some big technical challenges that have held back blockchain-based identity systems. For one, blockchains are still hard to use for many people. A problem that is particularly difficult for identity applications is that if you lose or forget your private keys, which aren't easy to manage in the first place, it's hard to restore them. Another technical challenge pertains to privacy. How will the personal identification data be kept separate from financial transactions? This piece is particularly concerning for privacy advocates in the context of Libra. given Facebook's less than stellar track record. And an aversion to financial surveillance fuels much of the cryptocurrency movement. All right, that whole paragraph is problem, reaction, solution. They're saying, look at all these technical challenges. Look at these privacy concerns. Look at this poor track record. Look at this aversion to working with banking financial surveillance systems. That's all problem. Reaction is, yeah, those are problems. Where's the solution? Oh, well, here's the solution. Take this mark, and you can use the Libra system. And all those problems, all those challenges simply disappear. And people will say, great, okay, digital identity. Come on, verify me. I want access. All right, we're almost done. Quote, where you spend your money and who you spend it with and how much you spend is some of the most private information for people, says Vaughn. On the whole, says Allen, though the technology of decentralized identity has advanced to the point of several serious pilot tests, it's, quote, not anywhere near ready for adoption by billions of people around the world. And given what the company has revealed so far, he says, I don't see how Facebook can do it. Well, guess what? Facebook's not going to do it. Concordia is. I've said about reading technical white papers, peer-reviewed papers, that it's like reading comic books. I read their quantum mechanics and their particle physics and all this other stuff and all their theories, all their supposed laws and axioms, and it's comic book stuff. It's pure drivel and nonsense. I don't care what kind of highly technical verbiage they use. It's still nonsense. Now you take that same sort of pejorative perspective that I have and apply it to reading about Facebook's Libra, which is really Concordia's Libra. And it's a comic book. It's a complete joke because we know it's all setting the stage, problem, reaction, solution, their modus operandi. Knowing that and knowing about creative destruction as their philosophy, both political, sociological, and economical, as I pointed out several times yesterday, the notion of destroying what is presently the system and creating through innovation and technology a new system is the philosophy of the politicians, the sociologists, and the technologists and the bankers, the economists. This is why there has to be a debt reset. This is why there has to be a war to bring on the economic collapse, the clean sheet of paper, the jubilee, and then the bringing in of Libra and the mark of the beast, almost concurrent. So when you talk about birth pangs, boy, at the last push, it's all concurrent. When the last couple of dominoes fall over, it's almost concurrent. Those events. And I am, with each passing day, I am more and more convinced when I read articles of confirmation, as I'm calling them, like I'm sharing with you this first one, and we're going to the next one regarding Greece. The articles of confirmation that are pouring in now, that 2020 has, I hate to be absolutely dogmatic, but if 2020 is not the year for the Antichrist, I will be soundly surprised because things are coming together so fast. And they're only going to come together faster and faster as 2020 unfolds. And at the last part of the live stream last night, I mentioned D-Wave and that they're bringing out next year, early next year, their 5,000 qubit model, which is really the 4096, the 4,096 qubits. because of the binary progression of the number of qubits from generation to generation of computer. It's the 4096. Well, that dovetails, that fits the jigsaw puzzle pieces to Libra coming out as they've advertised in the first half of 2020. Bam, 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 bam. All of this stuff. And now we see what's going on, like I said last night, the parallel tracks with Trump. What's happening with him is happening with Netanyahu. And now, today, the judicial department in Israel, if you will, the attorney general, has said that Netanyahu can remain prime minister, despite the fact that he's under indictment. Well, the same thing with Trump. He's still president, even though they're trying to vote on impeachment. Parallel tracks, walking step by step together, both of those leaders. Why? Because they both need wag the dog. They need the war to stay in power. And they need the war to collapse the economies, to bring about the debt jubilee with the clean sheet of paper, bring in Libra, and be able to bring in the Antichrist. Bam! All in 1 year. That's my picture. I could be wrong, but that's my picture. I'm just sharing it with you. Okay? All right, so we did the Facebook. Let's get over to talking about Greece now. Because again, these two articles absolutely fit together. This is from CEO Magazine. I want to thank the patron. I won't cite by name, but I want to thank the patron that sent this to me just before we went on the air today. Country, meaning Greece, country forcing citizens to spend electronically. Greeks who fail to spend 30% of their income electronically will be hit with a 22% fine on the shortfall. If an individual spends just 20% of their income through electronic means, they would face a 22% tax on the remaining 10%. Okay, I'm going to just call Prime Minister of Greece Karaoke because I can't pronounce his name, who since being elected on 8 July 2019 has issued a series of measures. Here we would call them executive orders, a series of measures to lift the country's moribund economy. The plan involves forcing its population to spend almost a third of their income electronically or risk being fined. All right, before I go on through the details of this, I sent it to you. You can read the details. Let's go to 40,000 feet. Let's look at history. Let's look at the big picture. You may recall that over the last 5 to 6 years, even a little more than that, Greece has been in terrible economic shape. You may recall that there was the mandate from the government to withdraw from private banking accounts, checking accounts, savings accounts, retirement accounts, investment accounts, to withdraw funds from those private accounts to balance the government's budget, to pay the deficit, to keep the government afloat, to keep the country afloat. They were stealing from people. And for many years, Greece was viewed by Russians, former Soviets, as a tax haven. And they put their monies in Greek banks and investments. And they received early warning that it was coming. This goes back about 6 years ago. And they pulled their money out of Greece. That only exacerbated the problem. That's just kind of a brief touch point on the history of what's been going on economically there. What I want to offer to you is that Greece has been a guinea pig. I won't get deep into this sort of tangent because it would take too long and it would distract from our focus, but go and look at the history of Greece and the Greek people. I'm not being negative on the people themselves, but look at it from a Christian perspective, the history of Greece. You know, an awful lot of attention is paid to Rome and the Romans. I draw your attention over to the Greek history and the Greco-Roman history being tied as it is. So, without getting into a tangent there, and it's something that I think Kathleen and I could address in another live stream, in a future live stream. But Greece and the Greek people have been guinea pigs for what's coming. And I mean that economically, guinea pigs. This article, and I'm sure you're way ahead of me already on this, drawing your own conclusions. But obviously, this ties into what we just covered with Facebook and digital identity and accessing the banking system with a verified identity. This is a movement in Greece as a test case to force people into a digital economy. Now, we've already been talking, for years about the idea that we are already functioning around the world. We're functioning as a cashless society. Cashless. We use debit cards, we use credit cards. Okay? Very seldom do we use actual cash. That has set the stage for what Greece is now mandating. And that is 20% to 35% of their transactions being conducted electronically. And why is that? Well, let's read the article. It'll explain it in just a second here. The Prime Minister said the move is to try to end the rampant tax evasion that takes place in Greece. Tax evasion is known as the country's, quote, national sport. And Greece has Europe's largest shadow economy. Okay, I mentioned that when we were talking about the underbanked, the underserved, those that are using cash, those that are using the barter system. What you might call the black market is the shadow economy. They want to attack that. They want to tap into those transactions. Prime Minister's government expects to raise more than 500 million euros every year from the initiative to force. See, this is amazing that they would even use the word force. I mean, that speaks of fascism, like we were talking about last night. We were talking about Saul Alinsky and Hillary Clinton, who we may get back to later on towards the end of this live stream. They're using the word force. Greeks to spend 30% of their income electronically. People who fail to meet the target will be hit with a 22% fine on the shortfall if an individual spends just 20% of their income through electronic means. They would face a 22% tax on the remaining 10%. This is a big initiative next year that will either raise more revenue because people will pay the penalty, or more likely because of the higher value-added tax receipts. The revenue predicted is likely to be at the lower end of estimates, and the country's banks will help to impose the measures by reporting spending to the authorities. You talk about Big Brother. So, this paragraph indicates next year. The initiative next year. You see how it's pointing to 2020? So many of these confirmations. So they give some examples, and it says here that many Greeks are paid, their wages are paid in cash, and they use the cash to pay their rent and their bills. Many countries in Southern Europe have booming shadow economies, with Greece among the worst, though the scale of underground activity can only be measured indirectly. So they put some numbers out there, but they've made their point here. What this means from 40,000 feet is this is the guinea pig. They're testing the system on Greece. Now, it doesn't mean that Greece is going to go to 100%. 100% electronic transactions. That's reserved for the whole world. That happens overnight. When we were talking yesterday about debt forgiveness and the Jubilee Light, the article I was reading last night put it that way. When they were talking about school loans, educational loans, and health care debt being forgiven. Okay, Jubilee Light. And my point was, they will not do that selectively on just two categories, because it would prematurely destroy, in this country, destroy the economy of the United States. What they want is to destroy the global economy in one fell swoop, not piecemeal. Same thing for Greece. It won't go 100% electronic until the entire globe is forced to go 100% electronic. This is why they're putting out these indicator articles, not only about Greece, but about Facebook and Libra. For those that are paying attention, these are red flags to say, here's what's coming. Here's the system. We're putting it out there. We're warning you. But there are only a very few people in the entire world that are paying attention to any of this stuff. And you guys are. You ladies and gentlemen, I should say. All right. Let me close a few tabs here so I can open a few more. See what I'm doing. Well, that was quite an hour. That went by fast. We'll try to pack in a whole bunch into the next hour so we don't have to run over too far. We might have to go over 2 hours tonight to get all this in, but we'll see. All right, let me see what I've got here. I hear Kathleen coming up the stairs.
I told everyone I'd come up and say hello to them. So
all right, so quickly say hi, because I'm trying to keep my train of thought here.
Well, I just did. I said hello.
You said hello. Well, I moved the microphone so everybody could hear you.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Continue.
She's here. Kathleen's in the house. No, she's not Elvis. All right. If you can turn that down so it doesn't feedback.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Thank you. All right, I'm just trying to get back on track here. Take a breath, get a drink of water if you need to, folks, while I get into my notes.
I was sharing with people in the chat room about George Logothetis because they were asking me how I knew. And so I was explaining to them about the college at which I work and the honorary degree that was bestowed upon him. So, and I shared how he was in my office and he was reading the sign above my desk. So, you know, that's how I had come to know about him and his company and them leading the charge with blockchain.
You shared that with me, and the rest is history. All right, I'm not going to cite the person that sent this to me, but I just want to read a couple of notes that this that a patron sent to me regarding last night. We're talking about Facebook, Ledger Book, private key, public key. These side notes: Ledger Book to Facebook. Interesting. This is kind of word association, okay, folks? Public to private key, blockchain, entanglement. This person says numbers can be images, true or false. An image of truth is not a number but a sound. And we are made in the image of Christ. The beast is made in its image. So let me read a few of these scriptures that were sent to me in this email, just to kind of take a break before we get into the next stuff. Revelation 13:18. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 2 Corinthians 4:4. In whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. Now this echoes what I said during this first hour, okay? These people, they're blinded. They're blinded minds. They don't want to believe. They want to believe in the Antichrist. John 3:33. He that hath received his testimony hath set to his seal that God is true. Colossians 1:14-16. In whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven, that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. That speaks to what I was saying about Satan being this little baby who's greedy and claiming everything as his possession, as his creation, okay? It's the 180 that Satan does of God's creation. And what we do when we apply our 180 to reveal the truth is to take it back to the point of creation by God. That's its 360 degrees. Numbers 23:10. Who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his. You see, we have nothing to be afraid of, folks, with all of this that we're presenting to you and laying out to you. We have nothing to fear. Nothing. All right. Let me get to my notes. I have got so much written down, I just don't even know if I'm going to get through it all tonight. I might get back to talking about Hillary and that whole thing that ties into the mentality, the philosophy of what's driving not only this impeachment of Trump, but this whole thing of destruction going on that speaks to Saul Alinsky and the rules for radicals. But you guys are familiar with that. I may not have time to really flesh that out any further for you, but it ties also to Edward Bernays, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and we published an entire issue in Entangled magazine talking about Freud and Bernays regarding marketing and advertising driving capitalism. But what the dovetail is here, that it overlays into this creative destruction, that capitalism is driven by innovation. It is driven by destroying the old and creatively creating the new innovations, the latest shiny bauble that we can all go out and spend our money on, which is just a debt-based system anyway. So, I mean, it's just, it's astounding when you look at all these players and how they all fit together into the things that we're dealing with today. But let's get into AI. Let's get into AI. I promised we'd talk about the history of AI. So, a couple of things before I cite the names. I'm just going to read from my notes because I've got so many pages here. If I don't read from the notes, I'm going to lose my sense of continuity here. AI only exists if it has data. I said, I think it was at the beginning of the year, I said that the beast system has to be fed. A beast, by definition, has to feed on something. The beast system, the blockchain being the infrastructure, it has to feed on data. Data is the food for the beast. AI only exists if it has data. It can't operate in a vacuum. It can be set up with algorithms because that's the functionality of artificial intelligence is algorithms, which are instructions. It began with machine learning, machine operation, a form of artificial intelligence operating industrial machines. That was machine learning in its infancy. But those were machine instructions, okay? A mill, a press, a lathe, a router, okay? Things like that. Robots in assembly lines, car factories, and things like that. But without data coming in, AI cannot function. Its algorithms just don't function. There's nothing to compute. So we leap ahead to what we've been talking about since about 2015, maybe earlier, the Internet of Things. This idea that the Internet is going to connect to everything. Where we're at today is the Internet of all things. Literally, and I'm sorry my stupid camera is not staying in focus because it is literally being interfered with, folks. There's nothing wrong with my camera. It's out of focus because somebody is interfering with it right now, and I apologize for that. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Oh yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, so forget about
just a big blur.
Forget about what I look like. I'll put the magazine cover up. Maybe that'll be in focus instead of the camera, and we'll move on. Here we go. Magazine, there we go. Okay, now that's in focus. Good. See, we beat the NSA at their own game. We just 180'd the NSA. They don't want me talking about this stuff. But anyway, okay. Reading from my notes. AI is driven by data. It's the Internet of all things. And there are literally, right now, billions of devices that are connected to the Internet. I'm not just restricting that number to phones and laptops and desktops and server systems and the cloud server systems. When we talk about nanodiamonds being the sensors at the edge of the Internet, at the edge computing, pulling in data, computing that data, taking the results and sending it through the cloud to the servers of the blockchain system. That's what I mean by billions and billions. I sound like Carl Sagan, right? Billions and billions of stars. I can't even reproduce his voice, but the point is billions and billions and trillions of things connected to the Internet, all sending data to AI. What does that do to AI? And then we'll get into the history. What does that do to AI? It learns. It's been self-programming. It's been learning since 2012. I said to you last night at the end of the live stream that I was going to talk about a seminal event, a tipping point that occurred in 2012. And we're going to get to that in more detail. Okay? So again, for the sake of continuity, trying to stay on my notes here. AI only exists with data. It feeds on data. It advances through big data. AI is software that writes itself. If you need to be able to explain to someone, give them a definition about what is AI. AI writes its own software. It is software. It is algorithms, but it is writing its own code. If you really process that, if you really take that to heart and understand the implications of what I'm saying, a machine that can program itself and exponentially is learning, is advancing. We've talked about things like Moore's Law. Some people will say Moore's Law means that the number of transistors that can be embedded in a silicon chip will double every year. Some people say every 18 months. Some other people say it doubles every 2 years. The point is that it doubles. It's exponentially advancing. Well, with Google's announcement of quantum supremacy over classical computers, over the Summit classical supercomputer that I mentioned last night, claiming supremacy, it was in one narrow, clearly, specifically defined test problem. It's not supreme over all classical functions and all problems. I've clarified that before, but I'm doing it again. It was just on one test case that it was supreme. It arrived at a solution in 200 seconds versus the projected 10,000 years that the Summit, the most powerful classical supercomputer on the planet, would take to arrive at the same conclusion, thus supremacy. Well, the deal here is that with that supremacy over classical computing and quantum computing being supreme over classical, quantum computing is advancing AI exponentially. Google's spokespersons, scientists, claimed that the algorithm embedded in their quantum computer chipset, which is AI, that it was doubling the doubling. Remember, exponential growth or advancement is a doubling. It was doubling the exponential in the rate at which it could process information, and that its algorithm was producing past the decimal point a string of digits that they claimed was unlimited, that was infinite. Let's go back to Revelation 9:1. I said this before and I published it in the magazine when we talked about quantum supremacy, but here it is again. Claiming that the numbers in the algorithm of the quantum supreme quantum chipset at Google, their 54-qubit quantum computer, that it was producing a doubling of the exponential quantity of numbers that for all intents and purposes, for all practical measures, it was producing at this doubling of the doubling rate numbers so fast and in such a vast quantity that the number past the decimal point was infinite. And we talked about Aristotle and Plato and the difference between an infinite viewpoint of the universe and infinite viewpoint of mathematics versus the finite. And we were talking about random number generation. We were talking about encryption and a private key that is encrypted. So you can listen to last night's live stream if you need a refresher on what we covered on all that last night. But all this pulls together. It pulls together under the rapid advancement of AI, what I've called the tsunami of AI, the doubling of the doubling, because they're trying to achieve artificial general intelligence, meaning that it is equivalent to and then supreme to the human brain, by which it is modeled. And that takes us to the history of AI, the human brain. Their attitude, the researchers and developers of AI, their attitude when questioned about the risks and the dangers involved in this doubling of the advancement of the tsunami of AI, their attitude I would sum up this way. They would say, and this is typical in a laboratory setting, the experiment must continue. It must continue despite the possibilities of something going wrong. Now understand that hubris when I read this to you about AI. It is a dispassionate system. Okay, it has no passion. It is a dispassionate system that cannot reflect that there is no recourse to its actions. There's no accountability. This is the black box conundrum, or paradox, as sometimes it is called. The experiment must continue, even though what they're creating is dispassionate. It doesn't reflect on its actions. It just keeps going forward, faster and faster. The process must continue. Okay. I want to read to you a quote from Elon Musk. He's talking about AI, and he says, it could be terrible, and it could be great. It's just not clear. But one thing is for sure. We will not control it. Now, he made that statement about 4 years ago, as I recall. AI is propelling us into the future as computer and the internet did for society decades ago. If we take a look at, and these are just my random thoughts that I was putting together today, when we look back, and we've taken for granted computers and the internet for so long now, but this is pulling us back into history. I'm going to get to the founding fathers, but this is pulling us back. If you stop and think about prior to computers, desktops, cell phones, mobile devices, laptops, and even the internet, look at how much the world has changed. I've said this a few times in the past. I can still remember, when I was working as a paramedic in Oakland, I then went into management, so to speak. I was asked by the owner of the company to set up the training division. So I went into management. And I remember very distinctly, I had my little Macintosh Plus, that I'd brought in because they didn't have any computer for me yet, and hooked up my computer to the email system. This was 1991. And I clearly remember the excitement of receiving my first email. Can you imagine such a thing? Getting excited about getting an email? But that was 1991. AOL. Okay? America Online. It's so horse and buggy to even be thinking about these things. And I was watching a PhD presenting a TED Talk from 2015. And this PhD was saying that the internet came online in 1995, and it did not. I've shared with you Tim Berners-Lee in 1989 at CERN, bringing together their intranet within CERN and then connecting to laboratories across the world, predominantly in the United States, for the first internet between the laboratories. And then DARPA got involved, and continuity of government, and the World Wide Web was formed. That was in 89 and 90 and 91. And yet I'm listening to this PhD in computer science say it was 1995. Well, he isn't old enough to remember, because I think the guy was only about 30 years old. I'm 66. I remember clearly how the internet developed. All right. Anyway. But the development of AI is propelling us into a future in much the same way, only exacerbated, I would say, much the same way that the computer and the internet change the world. This is what AI is doing. That's our context, okay? And we're going to be talking about contextual AI as we progress through this. Okay, so the pioneers of AI, the fathers of AI. One of them was Aristotle, who I mentioned last night, and what he proposed back in 300 BC as associatism. Okay, that's associationism. So you can look that up if you like. I'm going to move through my notes. The two of the fathers of AI that I'd like to mention, one you've probably heard of, but the other probably not. And there's a lot you can say in terms of the history of AI. We can go back into the early 50s, the 60s, the 70s, in terms of AI that I said earlier about its application for industrial purposes, for machines. And this is where the idea of machine learning sort of came from. What I'm offering to you is post that history. Let's call it kind of the Middle Ages, if you will, of AI history. So we have Frank Rosenblatt, who, interestingly enough, in 1957 was a psychologist. What does a psychologist have to do with computer science? Well, everything. Because what have we talked about here as the central tool for the controlling of humanity, the predicting of human behavior, the learning of AI by observing human behavior? It's all central. Computer science is all centralized in psychology. So, of course, the first developer of AI, modeling after the human brain, the human neuron, a neuromorphic AI, not a machine learning AI, but one that is patterned after the brain's physical structure and how it functions, was put together by a psychologist. Because that's what it's applied to. The psychological prediction of human behavior through its pattern recognition, its predicting of the future, and thus the control of humans, is all based on psychology. Frank Rosenblatt, in 1957, put together the first artificial neuron called the perceptron. Perceptron, like perception. Perceptron. You can look that up in Wikipedia if you want more on that. Okay? Again, a touch point for you. But a perceptron is a digital neural network. It mimics the human neurons. Its first application was for the classification of images into two categories. So the very first application of AI was image recognition, and it was facial. 1957, facial recognition. And this was what was known as a single layer neuron. Okay? Single layer. That's going to be important to look at in a few minutes. So his digital neural network was one layer of the layer cake, if you will. So that was Frank Rosenblatt. The other one was Geoffrey Hinton. Many of you may know of Geoffrey Hinton that are familiar with the advancement, especially since 2012, and we're going to get to that, by Geoffrey Hinton, who's still alive, by the way, and teaching. He's in Toronto. He changed the whole AI game, Geoffrey Hinton. Okay, so AI was distinguishing and putting in two categories images of humans, of people, by distinguishing them by seeing patterns. And the AI would learn from those patterns, the patterns of the construct of a person's face. Now, unfortunately, Rosenblatt failed in really being able to advance this idea of a neural network because, one, computers were very limited at that time in 1957, but the principal problem was that he only had one layer to this neuron. Whereas today, we have what is known as deep neural networks, which are multi-layered artificial neurons. So single layer, that made it a very limited application, and because of the slow computers of the day, it really didn't go anywhere in 1957. Now, just to explain a little bit about how an artificial neural network operates, it is central to its operation are what are known as the weights. Okay? W-E-I-G-H-T-S, the weights, which are the strength or the amplitude of a connection between nodes. So this, I would say, is similar to, in electricity, things like amperage, wattage, and voltage. The strength of the connection between the nodes, the computer nodes. Those are known as weights. And as you have varying degrees of weights, of strengths of connections in the neural network, you arrive at a conclusion, at a sum total. This is very similar to what happens with human neurons. There are strengths of connections between neurons. These produce thoughts. These produce memories. It's the strengths of the connections. Those are known in computer science as weights. By 1969, due to the limited computer power, the computer science community abandoned virtually all research in 1969 into AI. Geoffrey Hinton, interestingly enough, studied psychology and computer science. So I think we've been on the right track focusing on psychology as we've examined quantum computing, classical computing, and artificial intelligence, because the fathers of AI were focused on psychology. Geoffrey Hinton theorized the human brain was a neural network, and that it would learn through the strengths of its connections between those neurons, between those nodes. And I've said yesterday, and I've said it many times, and that is that when we use our brain, when we develop our critical thinking skills, it's much like exercising a muscle. Well, that's almost literally the case in terms of building the strength, the weights of the connections between the neurons. The more that we use our brains, the more that we bring in information, the more that we think critically about that information as we process it, and we make that information our own into our memories, we build very weighty connections, very strong connections between the neurons. And I've said before that this builds strong dendrites, that branching effect within the brain. Okay? So critical thinking is a way of combating the psychological impact of AI and its systems that are attacking us. Because they're trying to attack us on a psychological level, to dumb us down, to keep us at the brainstem level of thinking, where there is no critical thinking taking place. They're shifting us from the prefrontal cortex using AI to the brainstem so that we will just passively take whatever's handed to us. The counter to that, the 180, is to force ourselves, just like when we exercise, force ourselves to think critically, analytically, to question, to define, to dig deeper. That strengthens our brains. Okay? So you're going to the gym when you're doing critical thinking. So how do you make a device intelligent? Well, there's two options to making a device intelligent. One, you could program it to be intelligent, but that's very labor intensive. Or it can learn on its own. And that's where AI is at today, as I said earlier. That's in the deep neural network. That's in the Boltzmann machine. discussion, and we're going to get to that in a second. The nodes are artificial neurons, and the weight and the strength of those connections between the neurons and the nodes, it's what determines the learning process for AI. The weights are in the form of an equation. So mathematically, the weights, the connections, and their strengths are driven by equations in the programming. And these equations now can be developed spontaneously by the AI on its own with no input from humans. The weight can be changed through this learning process, the strength of those connections. So when I talk about critical thinking, strengthening our connections between our neurons, AI is doing very much the same thing in the strength of its equations utilized in its self-programming process. The neurons take the activities on the connections, they merge them together with the weights, and it adds them all up, and it comes to a conclusion. It sums them up. It then decides whether to send an output if it gets a large enough sum. If the answer, taking the weights, taking the activity of data coming in, filtering through multiple layers in these equations that produce the algorithms, if the sum total that it arrives at in this processing is large enough, the AI will output an answer. If it's not large enough, if it's a negative total in the processing of data, it doesn't send an output. Nothing happens. So what they do is wire up thousands of these nodes. They change and alter the weights, the strengths of the connections. They change the equations. They change the programming, the algorithms, in order to get it to do something. Now, I'm being very, pardon me, my computer is, there we are. So in order for AI to have any effect, to be able to process information and to be able to act based on instructions or act on its own, it has to have thousands of these nodes, thousands of these artificial neural networks, because then it has an application. Remember, if you only have a single layer, you're limited to the applications. If you have thousands of neurons with deep multiple layers, then you can apply it to many more complex applications. Okay? This is why there was the development into multi-layered neural networks. So the multi-layer plus more powerful computers allowed us to develop what are now called deep neural networks. Geoffrey Hinton published a paper in 1985. So we've moved from Rosenblatt in 1957 to Hinton in 1985, and he introduced the Boltzmann machine. And I've talked extensively about the Boltzmann machine, beginning with CERN, and then connecting CERN to D-Wave, and D-Wave using the Boltzmann machine. And I'm going to talk about CERN in a little bit with something that I haven't presented before. Okay? But he presented the Boltzmann machine in the fundamental building block, as a fundamental building block to deep neural networks. The Boltzmann machine essentially is a random number generation system, but it's key to D-Wave's combinatorial optimization in their quantum computing, and it's key in AI for deep neural networks, meaning deep layers, multiple layers in the AI system. Neural networks suddenly exploded in the 1980s. Okay? There was the experimentation in the early 80s. I think it was 1989 There was a DARPA program for autonomous vehicles. Those were deep neural network applications for the first autonomous vehicle programs through DARPA. And there were several others, MIT and Stanford Research Group produced in the 80s an autonomous vehicle. Okay? So it wasn't just Elon Musk. All right. Then Hinton produced a program in 1990 for the recognition of handwritten digits. Numbers that were written by hand could be recognized by a computer in 1990. And this was done not only with Hinton, but one of his proteges, one of his students, a gentleman by the name of Yan Lee Kuhn. And he studied under Geoffrey Hinton. Lee brought Hinton's theory of back propagation into reality. Now, back propagation is the self-learning that I mentioned earlier, the self-programming. And combined with the increased computer power, computers were learning from their mistakes. Think about AlphaGo. Think about the Big Blue from IBM years before with chess. But AlphaGo, utilizing back propagation, learning from its mistakes. And with AlphaGo 2, the next generation of AI was not even given the rules of the game, was not even told how the game operates. But it figured it out on its own with no programming due to back propagation. Almost instantly it learned how to beat the opponent. Something that the computer scientists of the day said it might take a couple of years. Without pre-programming, it might take a couple of years to beat a human at AlphaGo. It did it in less than an hour. So, all of a sudden, however, AI in the early 90s began to dry up. There was a lack of computing power and a lack of data because the internet in the early 90s was in its infancy. Remember, AI is the beast, and it has to be fed, and its food is data. And this is why I shared with you back in 1991 when I got my first email, the internet in its infancy was not producing large, vast quantities of data. AI needed data, and so the whole thing stalled. And computers, classical computers back then, were very slow, very cumbersome, and very large, even though we had desktop computers. So, along in about 2006, the computing speed all of a sudden jumped. The internet all of a sudden exploded, exponentially growing. And we had the ability to feed AI. So all of a sudden, in 2006, people started getting excited about AI again, and money started flowing into it. Big data was born. Now here comes 2012, as I promised you. September 30th, to be exact, September 30th of 2012 was the birth of what is known as the modern AI era, or the era of modern AI. September 30th of 2012. And Geoffrey Hinton, the first artificial deep neural network to be used on a widely known benchmark recognition system, a benchmark testing system for image recognition. There had been an application by researchers of various forms of artificial intelligence regarding image recognition. And they were only about 40% successful at any given test run in identifying an image correctly. But there was a system called ImageNet that was regarded in the computer science community as the standard, as a benchmark by which they would test all forthcoming AI systems. Well, Hinton produced the first artificial deep neural network, applied it to the ImageNet system, to the benchmark, to test it on September 30th of 2012. And this is where the big leap, the excitement occurred. Because they jumped from a 40% positive, correct recognition of an image to 75% success rate in 2012, greatly outpacing any of the even nearest competitors in image recognition. Hinton's 75%, and through others in the research and development community, pushed that over the years, over a 7-year period, pushed it from 75% image recognition success to 97% by 2018. At that point, at 97% success rate of image recognition, they surpassed the ability of the human mind, the human eye, to correctly identify images. This is why 2012 was the birth of modern AI. Okay? So what we have today is a system that is only self-serving, an AI system that is based upon its own self-interests. Remember the example of the baby, of the child? Self-interest. Children are only focused on their own needs, right or wrong. Well, so is AI. It's only focused on its self-interests, to the detriment of all others. This is the psychology of AI that I'm sharing with you tonight. The AI only thinks about itself. It doesn't care about humans. It doesn't care about other AIs. It doesn't care about classical computers or quantum computers. It only thinks about, like a baby, food, more data. Look at what Alibaba is doing, taking their AI and offering it a smorgasbord of data, healthcare, insurance, e-commerce, of course, the ability to vote. Even in China, they don't vote there, but in other countries, the ability to vote through Alibaba. That's the smorgasbord. Those are the plates that are being laid out at Alibaba for its AI, because the AI demands it. The AI wants all of the data of the world. It wants all aspects of our lives under its control, under its surveillance. This is the beast system, plain and simple, folks. AI today is a collective intelligence. And what I mean by that is that AI is not operating, and I'm talking about at the highest levels of AI. AI does not operate alone. It's connected to other AIs. We've often heard and we've talked about here about the hive mind. And that's where we're going here. It's not just the hive mind as it is applied to humans that we've borrowed literally from the bees, from ants, from termites. Not only borrowing from the animal kingdom this idea of a collective mind that works together for the benefit of the colony, of the hive, but AI at the highest levels is networked and has a collective mind. So when we talk about AI at the artificial general intelligence level, at a level that is equal to humans and super AI, super intelligent, it achieves that level of supremacy by collectively operating together with other AI systems. You know, most science fiction publications, they'll put out the notion, the picture, the element of a single entity AI. Well, that's not what's going on here, folks. This is a collective AI. It will, however, be under the control of one mind. Make no mistake about that. And of course, that's the Antichrist. But the technology will operate as a collective, as a collaborative AI system to achieve its supremacy. This is how the beast system controls the buying and selling. This is why there can only be a mark of the beast that will allow access to this system, because it is a collective system that is mimicking the omniscience of God, the counterfeiting of God knowing all in his omnipresence of being everywhere at once. That's the goal of AI, is to be like God. AI operates today at the highest levels in what is known as contextual AI. It takes things and puts them into context. Much as I have said many times about topics that we're covering, we have to put it in its proper context. This is what AI does. And if you think about that for a moment, a machine that is, in a way, in a form, self-aware. It's aware of its environment. If it's taking in data from all over the world, if it is using nanodiamonds as sensors at edge computing, if there are billions and into the trillions of devices connected to the internet now, beyond just computers themselves, then of course the AI, being networked, having this collective intelligence, has enough information to be able to observe the environment, to put itself, if you will, in a sentient frame of mind and be self-aware, and to put the information it's processing into a form of context. In other words, it's making sense of the information that it's processing. Okay? Where this is heading with this contextual awareness of AI is taking us to computing that is, by way of analogy, like electricity. If we think back into history, we can kind of think of Tesla and Edison and Westinghouse and people like that. When electricity was first being generated and distributed into society, people were fearful of electricity. You could get electrocuted, it could start fires. People would rather have an oil lamp in their house than to be bringing electricity through the walls of their home, fearing that their homes would catch on fire or that they would be electrocuted. But if you fast forward through the development, the distribution of electricity, it became ubiquitous in our society. It became commonplace. It became something you didn't even think about. Electricity was just there. You didn't fear it. You didn't worry about your house burning down. In fact, you depended upon electricity. And it was marketed and advertised as your friend. Quite a 180 for something that people initially feared. But it became commonplace. That's where AI is headed. not just computing, but that's where AI-driven computing is headed. Now, I don't know how long the world's going to hold together here, but that's the picture that they're painting. That's the picture of their goal, is to make AI and computing that is connected to everything, literally everything, your clothing, your body, your food, your furniture, your house, the environment, the air we breathe, the chemicals that are in it, the nanodiamonds that are in everything. The goal in computer science is for AI and computing to go the same way that electricity went. It just becomes commonplace. It disappears. We don't think about electricity unless it's interrupted, unless we're not able to connect to it. We have a storm, we have a power outage, but in our daily life, consciously, we don't think about electricity. This is where AI and computing is headed. At least that's their goal. Make it commonplace. They paint the rosy picture of this is going to improve humanity. The Kabbalists would call it tikkun, the redemption of the human race through technology. That's how much they believe in it. But this is the days of Noah. This is the Tower of Babel. This is the same outcome being repeated from history to today. Because God's not going to allow AI supremacy over the human mind. He won't allow it. He'll destroy it. He won't allow the destruction of the temple of His Holy Spirit, our human bodies. So in the scenario of Revelation 9:1, and the angel is cast from heaven and given the key to the bottomless pit, we also know that Satan knows that he has but a short time in that scenario. So we know the end of the story. That takes us to my final point of this evening, and that is CERN. I think I'll take the liberty of reading another email from one of our patrons. I won't give his name. I know he's listening. I hope you don't mind that I read my response. I won't even give the topic that I'm responding to because I don't really want to. Let's see if I can find this. And this is why I chose Revelation 9 again tonight, because it reminded me of something that Kathleen and I have talked about regarding CERN and quantum computing and D-Wave. And I'm going to wrap up this evening's live stream by going back to those statements again and repeating them, but I'm going to take it a step further. So here's the email, my response. Revelation 9, and he is given the key to the bottomless pit. I've maintained for years now the key is a private key for decoding instructions on opening the pit, and the pit itself is subject to interpretation via technology. I believe it is a mathematical pit, as in my discussions regarding Google's quantum supremacy, in which their algorithm essentially is endless. I now expect, and I've not cited this in public, CERN will not open the pit. D-Wave will. The large-scale research and development for the building of a quantum computer was done at CERN. The quantum mechanics of the Large Hadron Collider and of D-Wave's quantum computer chipsets are identical, except for their scales. As I have said now for years, the Large Hadron Collider itself is a quantum computer. The collisions are simply justifying their funding. The accelerator functions are the real game. So, let me explain that a little further, because that's kind of cryptic. I need a drink of water first. And I'll make this short. The quantum mechanics of the Large Hadron Collider. As you know, they accelerate particles to 99.99% the speed of light, and they have two beams of particles that are circulating in opposite directions simultaneously around a 17-kilometer ring. Now, we won't get into talking about the collisions because I consider that irrelevant. As I said, that just justifies their budgets, justifies their funding. What the real deal here is the acceleration of particles in opposite directions to near the speed of light. They needed to achieve that. They needed to prove this. This was a proof of principle experiment. To be able to control the movement of particles under acceleration, moving in a circular pathway, but in two separate opposing direction pathways, clockwise and counterclockwise. Okay? Now, for most experiments at CERN, those are protons. Sometimes they have heavy ions of lead. The point is that movement of quantum particles, fundamental particles, which is what a proton is, moving in opposite directions at the same time is exactly what happens in a quantum computer chipset. A qubit, a quantum bit, a qubit chipset in a quantum computer. Rather than protons moving in opposite directions at near the speed of light, you have electrons. Now, electrons move about 1/100th the speed of light, 100 times slower than the speed of light. Okay? They don't move at the speed of light. This is why you have an accelerator using radio frequency pulses to push in a synchronized, that's why it's called a synchrotron particle accelerator, in a synchronized fashion of pulses impacting these protons, accelerating them every time they come by these RF paddles. 11,000 times per second. They circulate 17 kilometers around the circle. They're really moving. But it's like paddles. They keep hitting these particles as they come by with an impulse, a radio frequency impulse, to accelerate them. Well, in a quantum computer, you have electrons that are flowing in opposite directions in a circle in the chipset, but on a much smaller scale. Obviously, a computer chipset is much smaller than 17 kilometers of the LHC's main ring. But the mechanics are identical. The quantum computer doesn't need to accelerate electrons. They're already moving fast enough for computational purposes. But it is the identical movement in opposite directions simultaneously in the computer that achieves superposition of zeros and ones, where a zero can be a one at the same time and a one can be a zero at the same time. That's superposition, because you have electrons that are moving in opposite directions at the same time, and therefore quantum mechanically they are occupying the same space. Okay? Same thing on a larger scale happens with the Large Hadron Collider. In order to build a quantum computer, 2 they first, on the macro scale at CERN, had to prove the concept could be put into practice. That you could move fundamental particles, protons, and electrons are also fundamental particles of the atom, that you could move them in opposite directions at a high rate of speed and control that. They achieved that at CERN. You could consider, because of the mechanics, the Large Hadron Collider to be a quantum computer. But they took the proof of principle, the experiment, and they scaled it down at D-Wave. Without CERN, the D-Wave quantum computer, the first quantum computer on a commercial basis outside the laboratory, so to speak, that was built, could not have been accomplished had it not been proven first at CERN. In my examinations of quantum mechanics, of quantum computing, of the algorithms, of combinatorial optimization, of geomancy, which is the historical origins and still continues to this day process of their operating system of quantum computers, all quantum computers, not just exclusively at D-Wave, but D-Wave has been forthright in saying that their operating system is based on combinatorial optimization, which comes right out of Ramon Lull in the 12th century of combinatorial optimization. He was the one who coined that phrase of geomancy. It is a spiritual system of divination. Therefore, taking all of those components and combining them together brings me to the conclusion that the key to the bottomless pit, which is a private key for decoding encrypted information, and that key, that private key, is given to the angel and cast to the earth. When we look at that technologically and interpret Scripture, technologically it tells us private key, encryption of data, and the decrypting of that private key requires a quantum computer to achieve that decryption of the encrypted information, the secret code. And the secret code are the instructions for opening the bottomless pit. That bottomless pit has to be defined. As I said here in this email, and I've said before, it could be for all intents and purposes, Google's quantum supremacy chipset producing an endless string past the decimal point, an infinite number past the decimal point of integers, of numbers, would be another way of saying bottomless pit. Mathematically, a bottomless pit. Through quantum computing, man is seeking answers. And it is an endless pit of information. God will not reveal all. He will not reveal his mind to man, and certainly not to Satan. The mind of God created everything, and man is seeking the answers to that which was created. If you cannot know the mind of God, because it's infinite, then you cannot discover the answers to everything that's been created. And in particle physics, in quantum mechanics, at CERN, they seek the prima materia, the first material, the origin of the Big Bang that they claim is in their theory. But there's so much information embedded in what God has created It is akin, it is like a bottomless pit of information. I'm not calling God's mind a bottomless pit. I would never blaspheme him. But I think you understand the depth of information that man is trying to seek, trying to tap into, is endless. And what they're opening up, imagine the psychology of those that are trying to unlock the secrets of the universe, their frustration. Let's use the example of the LHC and the colliding of particles. And they find new fundamental particles, but they only, for the briefest of moments, are in existence, and then they wink out of existence. Imagine their frustration. They keep seeking, they keep seeking, they keep sinking. They build a bigger machine. They're trying to build a bigger machine now at CERN. They're trying to achieve in 2026 the high luminosity Large Hadron Collider with stronger magnets and other equipment that I've outlined before. They're creating their own hell on earth in terms of psychology, in terms of frustration. Because every time they discover something, there's something further beyond that and further beyond that. It's like that string of infinite numbers past the decimal point with Google's quantum supremacy chipset. The algorithm just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. That's a bottomless pit. That's their hell on earth, psychologically. But the key to those instructions to opening that pit is to be given by God to an angel. And we could go into talking about, the locust army and the fire and the brimstone and the smoke and all of that stuff coming out in technological terms, but we're not going to do that tonight because we're already over 2 hours. Now, I'm getting the high sign from the boss in the house here. There must be questions, there must be statements and comments, and I welcome those. I just wanted to finish my thought, pull it all together to a fine point here. I wanted to emphasize that fact that I believe it is D-Wave's quantum computers. And again, they're 4096 chipsets coming out next year, right along with Libra next year. It could be Revelation 9.1 next year. All right, my dear. You've been very patient with me. Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, you know me, I love the study of words. And so, in looking up the etymology of the word itself, key, it brought me to the pronunciation from Middle English, Old English, to the the Middle Low German. And the word, we'll send out the link to people. They can actually go to Wiktionary.org and read the etymology of the word key. But what jumped off the page at me when you were talking about CERN and the key to the bottomless pit is that the word key, which has all of its different forms, again from English into German, but the meaning, it says here, the original meaning, because it goes from key to quiche to it's to K. I mean, it's all very similar in spelling, and then some of it just goes very different. But it says here the original meaning of Kaig-jo, Kaig-jo, which was a derivative of how key was spelt in German, was presumably a pin with a twisted end. The words in the root, K, K-A-I, followed by a consonant meant crooked or bent or twisted, are commonly used in the northern Germanic languages. But it also says it is an object designed to fit between two other objects, such as a shaft in a wheel, in a mechanism, and maintain their relative orientation.
A shaft and a wheel.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about CERN and we're talking about the key to the bottomless pit, and I'm simply going to the etymology of the word key, which everyone can go to and read, it is absolutely indicative of what we're talking about.
Yep. And the same person that I was reading my email response to had sent to me before I sent my response, key. Strong's indicates it's 2807, and it's spelled Kleis in the Strong's 2807 interpretation.
Yeah, yeah, that's in here too. Again, it's just the different way that this word has developed through the different languages. So koi is another word, K-O-A-I, which also means key. K-A-A-I also in Western Frisian means key. So yeah, it's just interesting to look at how the word key evolves in the different languages and its meaning. So,
questions from the chat room?
Let's see. We were talking about the mark of the beast. If I can go back, Brenda was saying that she had an idea of what she thought it might be, and I asked her to share it, and she said she thinks that they're going to put the highest frequency of light and electricity on our right hand, forming our entire code, changing the spin of everything. If we are to access our information and live in an electronic world, what else did she say? She said an IV into your right arm goes through the blood-brain barrier. I don't know. What do you think about that, though? About that possibility? High frequency of light and electricity onto our right hand.
In order to place a mark?
I think. Forming our entire code, changing the spin of everything. That's what she said.
Mm-hmm.
I told her that I've maintained that we operate on a different frequency, which happened to us when we became children of God. When we submitted ourselves to the Holy Spirit, He tells us we become a new creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, we are taken off, really. We're still in the world, but obviously, we hear the Christian phrase, we're not of it, but we're physically in it. And so we resonate at certain levels here on earth, but also as spiritual beings, we have the dual capability of resonating with that of God's Spirit. And our whole life is spent trying to hone the Spirit if we're not so focused on the things of this world. And what's happening right now at this stage is that there is a, for lack of a better term, a quantum shift that is happening, and we are being changed into being able to operate and resonate at a frequency that's not on this earth, and which is going to take us into a whole new realm of capabilities that we're not aware that we have, but yet Jesus told us all along that we do have, and we will be like Him. You and I were talking tonight about when Jesus, died, and those two men were walking on the road, and He came up to them, and they didn't even recognize Him.
Yep.
So He was spiritual form, but became physical form, and basically wanted to hear what they had to say, and they didn't even recognize Him at first. And then after He finished speaking with them, and they did recognize Him, They watched him rise up in the clouds, and an angel said, "Men, why are you staring up into the sky? This same Jesus that you saw will return in the same manner." And so he was literally just putting out there everything that he was, that was physical form turned spiritual, and he's coming back to physical again.
Yep.
So we're on the human platform, but we're now moving toward a more spiritual platform. So we're going to be gravitating to the way that Jesus was. I mean, when he was in physical human body here on earth, and he was developing to his fullest potential before his death and resurrection, he was operating in a heavenly realm in a human earthly world and exhibiting spiritual power. So he was, in a sense, operating against this world system by his mere existence and the things that he did and said, which defied the human understanding.
Yep.
And so that's what we're moving toward. And in fact we're at the stage where Jesus was at the wedding in Cana.
Yeah.
When his mother came up to him and said, "There's no wine left." And he's looking at her like, "Woman, what do you want me to do?" And she just like bypassed him and looked at his friends and said, "Do whatever he tells you." In other words, she knew that he had these capabilities. We know that we have these capabilities, but our wedding hasn't come yet. And I'm not talking about the wedding feast of the Lamb. That is coming. I'm talking about when we are put into situations in this world where we have to operate outside the worldly system, the worldly currency system.
And outside beyond physics.
Exactly. When God is going to exploit in Satan's understanding of what he thinks is his world now, that there are God's people operating outside of the system, and it's going to infuriate him.
Yep.
Infuriate him that we will be able to exist on and in the same manner that Jesus did. Multiplying food will be just something that we do without thinking.
Yep.
Healing the sick will just require, praying for that person and believing by faith that God heals them and they're healed. We have to operate outside of this world system or we wouldn't survive.
Yep.
So he's already built in contingencies for us to be able to do that.
What I call compensatory mechanisms.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, let's bring this to a close. It's well over 2 hours now, and I'm respectful of your time, and I'm getting tired. Sometimes going for 2 hours nonstop, it just fries the brain. But anyway, thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. As I like to say, Lord willing, we will be back together on Sunday, and I don't know if Kathleen will be here at home on Sunday night or not. A lot of it depends on the weather. But anyway, thank you very much for your friendship and your fellowship and for your interest in the things that we present, and we hope and pray that this has been helpful. So have a great night, have a great weekend, and God bless you all. Good night.
Good night.